MiVote Mackinac Tonight is brought to you by ITC Holdings, the Masco Foundation, DTE Energy Foundation, PBS Chemicals, Comerica Bank, and by MGM Grand Detroit.
Good evening and welcome to MiVote Mackinac. I'm Christy McDonald. Day 2 wraps up at the Detroit Regional Chamber's Mackinac Policy Conference. Hundreds of business leaders and politicians all in one place to talk about Michigan. And education was the big topic from early childhood to K through 12. The most anticipated speaker was former Washington, D.C. Schools Chancellor Michelle Rhee, who spoke about our public schools and what education reform should look like.
We need to begin to honor the teaching profession and respect teachers for the incredibly difficult job that they have every day. We need to recapture the American spirit, the American competitive spirit. Because I will tell you that as a country, we have gone completely soft. We have to begin to see education as a bipartisan issue.
Michelle Rhee, the founder of Students First and former chancellor of the District of Columbia Public Schools, wants to change the way we raise our kids.
If we're teaching our kids that just by showing up, you're doing great, we are not giving them the skills that they need to be able to compete in the global marketplace. So we have to regain our American competitive spirit. There is no doubt in my mind that we can do this as a nation. We just have to dig deeper into what we stand for as a country.
Rhee is also concerned about what she calls analysis paralysis.
There is no perfect way to measure anything in life. You are not going to be able to come up with the foolproof model. In any other profession that exists, their evaluation systems are not perfect either. That should not stop us from moving forward. The way to move forward aggressively is to put a model in place that you believe, based on the research and other things, is better than what we have now. And I think everyone would agree that what we have now is not good at all. So move to something better and then be committed to iterating over time and to be learning from sort of the mistakes that you're making in the first couple of years to make it better as time goes on.
Rhee's speech was highly anticipated, and her words ignited those in the audience ready for change as well.
I really believe in the evaluation process, and I think teachers need to agree to that and rise to the challenge.
I teach college, so I get a lot of students that come to me unprepared, not ready. But I am also an MEA member, so I understand that we as a union, we need to be helping to move reform along as well.
And it's not just emphasis on K through 12. Higher education is also an important issue.
As the state begins to recover and we see revenues begin to recover, we hope that we can see a reinvestment in both our students through financial aid, our campuses and some of our aging infrastructure to have state-of-the-art facilities and technology to train people for the jobs of the future.
So the state of education in Michigan is where we start tonight. And joining me to tackle that and other headlines from the conference today, our roundtable tonight, Craig Fahle, host of the Craig Fahle Show on WDET. Also Ingrid Jacques, the deputy editorial editor at the Detroit News, and Nancy Kaffer, columnist for the Detroit Free Press. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. So day 2 is in the books, and I don't think I've ever seen a policy conference focus so much on education than ever before.
Well, yeah, it's a business conference, right? But obviously, somebody has discovered the link between an educated population and a qualified workforce. And so they really are trying to get at this. And what I like about it is, for the first time in several years, we're actually looking at long-term solutions to a lot of our problems. I mean, we've been trying to dig out of this financial hole for so long, and that's dominating. What are we going to do tomorrow? What's going to happen tomorrow? This is thinking 20 years down the road. And it's about time that we actually get to the bottom of what's actually going to fix it. And it's been a more substantive conversation than I think a lot of people expected on this.
And I think it kind of breaks down. You're looking at reform, you're looking at curriculum, and then you're also looking at the funding and how to get it done. But let's start with Michelle Rhee, and Ingrid, I'm going to start with you. What did you think of her message, and do you think it resonated with the people who were up here?
I think it did, and I really liked it personally. I've never heard her speak in person before, and I think she did a really good job just conveying her message in a simple, straightforward way, that what she's doing and what the focus should be on is the children in the schools that are, in many cases, failing them. And I think it's a great message. I like that she focused on that this should be a bipartisan issue. It shouldn't be Republican, Democrat. She says she's a Democrat. That was something that Jeb Bush talked about yesterday as well, that politics shouldn't matter. It should be focused on the kids.
Oh, and it's so much easier said than done, Nancy. I mean, I don't think you're going to find a person around that's going to say, no, let's not think about the kids, but why isn't it so difficult to make that happen?
I feel like people on each side say the other side doesn't think about the kids, and if they only put the kids first, all our problems would be solved. I was very interested in hearing Michelle Rhee, because you look at, in the last couple of years, we've heard from Jeffrey Canada and Michelle Rhee, who are kind of the two superstars of education reform. And I have to say, I was not blown away by what Michelle Rhee had to say. I feel like that our outcomes are disparate and less great educational outcomes have a lot more to do with the wild socioeconomic disparities that we're dealing with in this country than it does with any kind of thing where American kids are soft and weak and incapable. I mean, we're talking about, we have a country in which kids from lower income or families come to school without the basic tools that middle class or professional children of professionals have. It's kids are starting at a disadvantage. We don't have a school system that really works on bringing kids who are low performing up to speed in any kind of measurable way. We have everything invested in high stakes testing, and so we have outcomes that may not rival other countries.
And Craig, you moderated that
Yes.
session with Michelle today. So did she not address any of that?
I want to push back on that just a little bit, because I think her message has actually changed somewhat in the last few years. There was an acknowledgement that if you're going to be judging teachers, looking for qualified teachers, trying to figure out what makes somebody a good teacher, you do need to take some of those factors into account. She did not dismiss the idea that poverty is not a factor in whether a child can learn. She's talking about measuring kids where they are and the type of progress they're making from where they started, as opposed to how are they stacking up against suburban kids. That has changed a bit in her message over the last couple of years, and I think it's a recognition that this is a much tougher nut to crack than a lot of people want to think it is.
What would you say? Hang on, Ingrid. What would you say to that?
I would agree, and I think her focus is on changing policies in states, things that we can actually challenge. Things like you can't change the neighborhood a kid grew up in, but you can make these reforms on the state level that could have impacts in places like Detroit, where the kids need it most.
Nancy, are those conversations happening?
Yes and no. I think Craig is right. She has modulated her viewpoint, but she did say today in that clip you just played that we've gone off the rails because American kids are soft. I mean, she said that today, so she's not walked it back that far. Are the conversations happening about how we can help kids who come from less privileged background achieve academically? I mean, it's a really hard thing to try to compensate for. When you look at what, for example, Jeffrey Canada has done, it's an incredibly comprehensive area focused on a 100-block area of Harlem and 100-square block area of Harlem, and it's extremely expensive, but it works. But do we have anything on that scale going on? No, and I don't think we even have anything like that on the horizon.
All right, so when we're talking about education reform, I also want to talk a little bit about curriculum before we leave this issue. And the core curriculum was turned down by the
Common Core Standards.
The Common Core Standards. I'm sorry, the Common Core Standards.
Yes.
Thank you, Nancy, for correcting me.
Yeah, that's the root of the problem.
It totally changes it. But the legislature, they did not include money in the education budget for that, and that is a big conversation that's happening up there. Thanks for a good catch, Nancy.
Well, I'll tell you, everybody got scolded for that behavior in the legislature. Michelle Rhee scolded the legislature for that one. Jeb Bush scolded the legislature for that one. And everybody else who's up here says, you know what? This is dumb. We can find a way around this. Common Core is not some sort of indoctrination strategy, put upon by the United Nations, which actually somebody talked to me about here on the island. That's not what's happening here.
Slightly wild.
The politics are in the way of something that is actually going to give us something that we can measure ourselves against with other schools. I'm frustrated.
Do we have time to talk
Go
about
ahead,
this?
yep.
The last big education reform that we had was No Child Left Behind, which required states to develop assessment models for their students. But there was no requirement that those models rise to any level of rigor. So you had states could make a test that was really easy to pass and there was no punishment, or a test that was really hard to pass and there was no reward. So you had states able to determine their own way of how they assessed their programs. And we have not really seen, so unsurprisingly, that did not drive any real positive.
Well, I mean, but the people who are up here on Mackinac Island right now for the Mackinac Policy Conference are the ones that can affect change.
Yeah.
They're the business leaders and the legislators that are up there right now. So what do they take out of hearing something like Michelle Rhee said today and the conversations that are happening around education on the island this week, Ingrid? What do they take out of this? And what do we see down the line, I guess?
Well, I haven't seen lawmakers like Tom McMillan, who's very much pushing against Common Core up here. I haven't gotten his take, but it seems like there's just such a mounting effort to support the Common Core. I think it's going to be hard for Michigan to drop those standards at this point. I think it's already moving down the road.
Final word, Craig.
Talking to Senator Phil Pavlov about this when he leads the Education Committee, he's convinced that they're going to get this figured out before October 1 when the new standard, when all of this goes into effect. It's going to get done.
All right, well, still talking about education, more education news today. The governor announced today almost $60 million has been raised to primarily support the Educational Achievement Authority, the EAA, which has taken over 15 low-performing schools in Detroit. That money today will also create a college scholarship for Detroit students and other educational programs. Take a listen.
I've made multiple visits to both EAA and DPS schools, and it strikes you in the heart to see the progress being made, but there's much more to be done. And that's why today's so exciting. This is a big deal, folks. Changing the lives of those kids. We're leading the nation with the efforts of the EAA at the most persistently failing schools, or what were the most persistently failing schools in Detroit and across our state. They're no longer going to be there because the EAA is going to change that.
There have been questions about where the EAA was getting their funding. So this announcement today, does that erase some of the questions surrounding this district?
It gives them certainly more stability than they had a week ago when we didn't really know where the funding was going to come from, and you had to have these sort of convoluted loans, AKA pass-throughs, that really looked bad. I mean, the EAA has got some interesting ideas in it when it comes to dealing with some of these lowest performing schools. Yet there are a lot of people who are going to line up against this, and any ammunition you get for the opposition to oppose something like this, especially fudging applications, they got off on a really bad foot. So maybe this, I guess, alleviates some of that criticism for a little while. I'm not sure it will, though.
It's interesting, Ingrid, though, because when you look at what's actually happening inside those EAA schools, they have some very interesting ways of doing things and helping kids learn. And their test scores have shown that they've been able to make progress with some of the lowest performing kids. Is that clouded, though, about the structure around it?
Well, I think people are going to try to cloud it as much as they can, especially people who are against this new model. It's really shaking things up in Detroit anyway, and there's a lot of opposition to it. But I was just talking to Dan Varner, the state board and head of Excellent Schools Detroit, and he says, we just need to give this a couple years, give it some time. To see if it's actually going to work. I mean, these schools were the 15 worst in Detroit. So, I think that's fair. I mean, we can argue about the minutia of the funding and how it's all working, but it seems like initially they are getting some results. Kids are making a year's worth of growth, sometimes more. That's what we should be looking for.
Nancy, how did that announcement strike you today about the funding?
It's good that they're going to talk a little bit more openly about where their funding is coming from, be a little bit more explicit about their funding situation. I think that things like the EAA have worked in other places. I think the EAA is not necessarily a bad idea, but I think it doesn't have enough of a track record. They've shown some gains in what they've done so far. And, it's a thing where we really need to kind of see what happens. See, are these gains sustainable? Are they really making the interventions that help kids who come from those backgrounds we're talking about earlier that aren't as equipped make, like I said, sustainable gains in learning and in what the outcomes are? And if that is what happens, that's fantastic. But, as we get there, we really need to be very transparent about what's happening and who's doing what.
Well, and also, how quickly are these EAA schools going to be able to pivot when you find, because they all have sort of, they have a lot more autonomy. And so if you find one EAA school that's doing better than another, how quickly can you apply some of those procedures when you've got a different administration in place at those schools that's trying to do something different? Finding a solution that works and being able to act quickly, I think, is critical on this situation. So the EAA is trying to be a more adept organization, quicker to turn than a school district.
Yeah,
so
and I think it's really interesting. Dr. Covington did tell me earlier, when the teachers do take a look at some of the scores that they get back on these kids, and they can see where the progress is being made, and so then they say that they can adjust those things on a more immediate level, which will be interesting to see, though. But I think you do have to give it some time to see how it all plays out.
I think so.
All right, and before we leave the EAA, it's something that the governor feels very strongly about. Nancy, what does this say about the governor's role, that he's got to keep pushing for this program that he wanted to codify in the fall, and now he's still at the point where he's trying to convince people that the EAA should go forward?
What does that say about the governor's
governor's
position?
leadership, I think.
You know, he had a very strong agenda when he came into office. He wanted to balance the budget. He got that done. And then on other topics that he's cared about, he hasn't necessarily, he got everybody to go along with him on that stuff, but he hasn't necessarily been able to build really strong consensus on other things that he was very committed to, like the AAA, like he had a battle over the road funding issue. He didn't really, during the right to work and the issue in the lame duck session of last year, he kind of didn't give the impression of someone who was really making strong decisions. So, I mean, this just seems like more par for the course. He spent a lot of political capital in the things that he cared about, and I'm not sure what his capabilities are going.
All right. Well, you know what? Other thing that's been on the minds and what people have been talking about here up at Mackinac is, of course, Detroit and the future of Detroit and where we're headed now. Andy Dillon spoke today, and he said that the next few weeks are going to be telling that they're ready for whatever happens next. What's your gut feeling about what road we're walking down here, Craig?
It's tough to say. I think there's still a lot of posturing going on. You know, you hear the discussion about the DIA and the art collection. It seems a lot of this is really designed to get people to finally sit down and start talking about what they're willing to give up. Because somebody's going to have to give up something. Bankruptcy would be a brutal option for the city of Detroit. Nobody wants to go there. But it is on the minds of a lot of people. And I just think that right now we're getting down to the final stages of people actually agreeing to sit down and negotiate. That seems to be where we are right now. We'll see what they decide to do. But, you know, the argument right now is, okay, you can take, 60 cents on the dollar, or you can take 10. Take your pick. I mean, that's where we are.
I mean, with the thought that they could liquidate some of the art collection. I know that there was just a bill introduced in the Senate yesterday saying to try to stop that. Is it, though, now on the minds of many more people who realize that Detroit's financial future does affect them?
Sure, I think a wide swath of the Michigan population would really hate to see some of those treasures in the DIA get sold off. But at the same time, this is a situation Detroit's in, and I think maybe it's a bit of a wake-up call for people who've gotten a little complacent about how bad things really are there. I think the governor came out and, in effect, defended Kevin Orr's decision to at least look at those assets, because that's his job. That's why he's there. He needs to make those tough calls. And whether he would actually go that far, I seriously doubt it. But I think it kind of has to be on the table.
Nancy, you and I were talking about it's kind of that scary road if we're heading towards bankruptcy. We kind of don't know what this is going to look like.
Yeah, bankruptcy is still really uncharted waters. There's been more municipal bankruptcy filings in the last few years than there had been in probably the decades before that. But part of that means that things are getting litigated in a way that they hadn't been before. Stockton, California, for example, had filed a plan of adjustment in its bankruptcy filing where they were asking bondholders to take a pretty big haircut, but continuing to make their pension payments. And bondholders are coming to the bankruptcy court to say, no, we think pensions should be on the table too, because if the city had dealt with its pensions, they wouldn't be needing to adjust our debt. And the bankruptcy judge has said, you guys need to work this out, because if we go up to, if this gets litigated, I'm not sure what's going to happen. And the New York Times opined that this could be something that would go to the Supreme Court about whether or not pensions could be cut. Now, in Michigan, our state constitution protects pensions, but the supremacy clause is generally understood that federal law trumps state law. Would that happen here with pensions? Could it happen here with the art, even if a state law was passed to protect the art? This is really uncharted waters. No one's done that. Detroit would be the biggest bankruptcy filing in U.S. history if we filed. No, I think anyone who says that they can tell you what's going to happen is not someone you should listen to.
They don't know. It's weird because I feel like in the last year we keep saying, well, we've kind of hit bottom. Now we're going to start to fix things. Have we hit that point? And Craig, when you've talked to business leaders over the last couple of days here, what are their thoughts, and when they have their businesses either in the city of Detroit or in Michigan, how that would reflect on how they do business, should Detroit?
In a strange way, some of the people that I've talked to just want to get it done, because I don't think they're worried about that, because there's actually the perception out there that Detroit is finally dealing with its fiscal problem. They're looking at this and saying, well, we're getting serious about it, and now's the time to invest because prices are good, come on in. And they're saying that, this isn't necessarily going to reflect that badly, because we've had this reputation as being so poorly managed for a long time that any story that makes it look like Detroit is actually getting its act together is okay, even if it's bankruptcy.
that they're finally doing something about it. Ingrid, what are people telling you?
To be honest, I haven't heard much talk about that subject. I think a lot of the business leaders are looking beyond it at this point. You know, they're
planning for the future,
right?
right?
Exactly. Yeah. They're focusing more on building their businesses, getting an educated workforce out there. I mean, those are the issues I'm hearing about.
Nancy, what about you?
Conversations I've had with business leaders, a lot of them have done what they've been doing sort of despite the city.
Yeah.
Kind of around them.
Even though there have been definitely some improvements and efficiencies under Mayor Bing. He's streamlined a couple of departments that have been helpful. He's gotten some people who have been pretty helpful. People like Dan Gilbert is buying buildings because he thinks it's a good investment and he thinks it's going to work out well for him financially. And this doesn't really connect to the city in a really direct way. People who are opening small businesses have often waded through tons and tons of city bureaucracy. They've maybe partnered with nonprofit organizations like Sue Mosey's Midtown Inc., who provides, helps with infrastructure things like street lighting and public easement maintenance and things that typically a city provides. So a lot of business owners have made these investments despite the city, and I don't think that's going to change. Even with the emergency manager or a bankruptcy filing.
Well, and Christy, isn't that exactly what we predicted was going to happen at this conference last year? That the business leaders weren't going to wait around for Detroit to get its act together. They were going to start investing. They were going to start pushing forward on their ideas. Foundations got involved. They didn't wait around. And you know what? They're going to survive through this regardless of what happens. They're plowing ahead, and they realized they had to, because you can't wait around for this to get settled.
And they're also playing a huge role in helping Detroit plug its holes, whether it's buying squad cars, ambulance rigs, and that sort of thing. All right, well, I can't leave without talking a little bit of politics with you. And one of the things on the island tonight, of course, is the debate between 4 of the Detroit mayoral candidates. What do you think we should be looking for from these candidates? What do you want to hear from them, Nancy?
I want to hear really good, practical plans about how they're going to help fix Detroit. I mean, the emergency manager is a reality. Talking about fighting the emergency manager does not have a point, at least within the next 18 months until he can be voted out by local government. I don't want to hear blustering. I want to hear real ideas. Crime,
Ingrid, obviously is a key issue for people who are living in the city right now. Are you hoping that they address that?
Well, certainly. I mean, I think inevitably the whole EM situation and bankruptcy is going to play a big role, but I would sure hope that crime is brought up too. I mean, I think that's on the minds of citizens.
Yeah. What do you think, Craig? We've seen these candidates. They've been wearing out the carpet here in the parlor of the Grand Hotel and shaking hands and talking to people.
Here's what I want to know. How are they going to spend that first 8 to 10 months that they're in office when they don't really have any power? What are they going to do over that 8 months to be prepared for when they actually get the reins? I think that's going to be a really critical period. You got a new council that's coming in. You've got a new mayor. Got a lot of time to get to know each other, find each other's strengths and weaknesses, find a plan of action.
And even though they might not be doing very much, Kevin Orr is still in place, though, it is still important for people to get out there and vote, knowing full well that once Kevin Orr leaves, they are going to be in charge, whoever that person is.
That's right.
All right, I'd like to thank my panel so much, Nancy Kaffer, Ingrid Jacques, and Craig Fahle for joining me. We so appreciate it from Mackinac Island. You know, one of the big traditions of the Mackinac Policy Conference is the gathering on opening night. And the guys from Under the Radar, Michigan headed out to the party on the porch to see what people were talking about.
Hey there, Tom Dalton from Under the Radar, Michigan. Tonight I'm hard-driving investigative reporter for Detroit Public Television. They hire me for the tough stuff. My job tonight at the Policy Conference is simple. Find out 2 things. 1, what's the most important thing that you'll take away from this conference? And number 2, what's the best hors d'oeuvre? Come on, let's find out. What's the most important thing you think will come out of this conference?
I think a better understanding of where different people in different environments are on the issues, so that there's a better opportunity to network and to continue to work on building solutions rather than arguing about things.
Well, I would like to take home a forecast on where we are as a state, where Detroit is as a city.
Usually, this is a place where the things that are going to be happening in Michigan for the next 3 to 5 years or longer all get laid out here. So it's an opportunity to kind of get a peek at what may or may not be coming in the future here in Michigan.
Hopefully a consensus on what constitutes real education reform. I'm not sure we'll get it, but hopefully.
I think that the understanding that regionalization works and the more folks that work together, the more better for the state, more better for the cities.
What do you think is the most important thing that's going to come out of this conference this year?
Well, I think it's a galvanization around three very important principles that you heard Sandy and the governor talk about this morning, which is the global economy, education, and cultural changes. I mean, if those three things can happen, I think you're going to see Michigan, and especially its urban communities, move forward.
Perfect. Now the important question, what's your favorite hors d'oeuvre?
Hot dog.
Oh!
I know we haven't gotten that far yet, but I don't like seafood.
Oh.
So...
I recommend the beef then.
It's tough to choose, but I have to say that salmon over there and those mussels, it's a great combination.
I could use some mussels. Thanks.
I have no idea. I haven't had time to eat.
I don't have one. They're all good here.
Probably the shrimp cocktail.
I'm going to say shrimp cocktail because I just love that.
Probably shrimp.
Second very important question.
Shrimp.
I didn't ask you what.
Shrimp. Always the best hors d'oeuvre.
Well, as you can see, a lot of very important things are coming out of the conference this year, and a lot of very important things came out of that kitchen, too. My personal favorite? Why, it's whatever this stain is right here. Oh, gosh, my wife's going to kill me. Uh-oh.
Clean that shirt. Remember, you can find the Under the Radar Michigan show on Detroit Public TV and PBS stations around the state. That'll do it for our coverage tonight. Friday marks the end of the Mackinac Policy Conference. We will have coverage throughout the day and one final show if you missed anything. For all of us at Detroit Public Television, I'm Christy McDonald. Good night from Mackinac Island.